Hi, everyone. My name is Brax Montier with UFLTV, and I'm here interviewing Sean Erickson. Will you tell everybody who you are?
Yeah, like you said, my name is Sean Erickson. I've been in real estate for about 11 years and specializing in divorce real estate for probably about five and a half years now.
Wonderful. Well, I have some questions for you. So,
Great.
my first question is, what makes real estate important to the parties in a divorce case?
Well, I think what's important about real estate is, I mean, not everybody who goes through a divorce owns a home, right? And not everybody
Yeah,
who owns a home ever gets divorced, of course. But typically, it's the largest financial asset in most people's lives, divorcing parties or not, right? So I
yeah,
think what's important about it is just knowing that, hey, we've got this very large asset. If you're a business owner, stuff like that, obviously there's other things. But for the most part, it's the largest financial asset that they own. So to have as much protection and I guess comfort around it. I don't know if comfort's the right word, but just knowing that there's some protection and people looking out for it typically goes a long ways when you're dealing with some people who've been going through a lot with their divorce cases.
yeah. A divorce is a really emotional process, and it gets very personal very fast. I don't know anybody who can have a non-personal divorce unless it was already
Right.
decided beforehand. So yeah, a lot of people can just kind of get crazy when divorce comes to town. So
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we typically say the three hardest things you'll do in life are, or may experience in life are death, divorce, and moving. And in this case, we're incorporating two of the three, right? So it's
yeah,
it's very emotional on top of like, hey, there's still some very practical matters that need to be handled in a timely manner at that. So
yeah, absolutely. Is it hard to sell a house that was an asset in a divorce? Do people care if it was or wasn't?
um not necessarily. It's one of those things. It's not simple and it's definitely not easy. At the same time, depending on where they're at, and certainly if it's been a court ordered, that's like it is what it is, right? They have to
Yeah,
sell the property. It's the decision's been made. I would say like anything, like any typical even real estate transaction, there's always complications that arise. You kind of already brushed up against it already, saying that it's a very emotional process, divorces,
yeah,
and selling a house is the same way. Even if you're talking your typical transaction where husband and wife or need a bigger home or they need a smaller home or whatever, right? So when you add in that other element of divorce, it kind of takes things up to another level where getting everybody on the same page, and I mean, it doesn't mean they all have to agree with each other or like each other, but just realizing that even though you may have your certain feelings for, each individual party, back towards the other party, that, hey, let's work on this together and using somebody like myself who specializes in being kind of that neutral third party to get you the best deal and the best resolution at the end of the day.
wonderful. Um, what is the process of putting a house on the market during a divorce as compared to after the decree of divorce is issued?
Um, I'd say it's probably not all that different other than where it came from. When I say where it came from, if I'm dealing with somebody who's actually actively going through the divorce process that hasn't been, the decree hasn't been ordered yet or hasn't been declared as official that this needs to be done, it's usually probably somebody that I know. If I don't know both the parties, certainly probably somebody one of the sides that I know, and it's just more of getting them again. The biggest thing is the trust. So let's take a step back and it's getting them to trust me, not because I have an ulterior motive or I'm working for one party over the other. Even let's say the husband reach out to me because I have a relationship with him. My job is to let them both know, hey, when it comes to selling your home and getting your home on the market during this time frame of what you're going through, really, I have no dog in the fight. I think I said that already, but my point is it's truly that. Really, I want you guys to get the best deal possible for your property, and just getting that kind of trust me. Whereas with if it's the divorce is done and everything, and it says if I'm in the court order saying Sean Erickson to be the listing agent for the property at 123 Main Street, that's a little bit different in terms of my ability to be like, okay, guys, like here's the process, this is what I need it done, because we usually have an out spouse and an in spouse, right? So
Yeah.
My conversations are separate but equal with both parties. So I let them know up front that I'm very transparent. So if you say something to me that you don't want the other party to hear, maybe hold that back. Give me the pertinent facts, what I need to know. How, like for instance, how quickly can you have the home ready for photos? How long will it take you to fix the leak under the kitchen sink, or whatever the case may be, right? I'm going to let the other side know that, hey, there's a leak, supposed to be a leak under the kitchen sink. We're in the process of getting that fixed. But when I'm assigned to a case, or put into a court order, it's a little bit more clear cut. And those usually, when that's the case, I'm usually brought in by one of the side's attorneys. They reach out to me and say, "Hey, we've got this property. Are you interested in taking this on as a potential listing, potential sale? Are you willing to work with it, etc." So it's a little more clear cut in that respect.
Wonderful. Has there ever been a time when the parties in a divorce case have actively worked against you during the selling process? And how did you handle that?
um, Yes, I think it kind of goes back to a little bit about what I just said in terms of establishing that rapport. I mean, it's in real estate in general, building that rapport with people so they can know, like, and trust you is paramount. Otherwise, kind of really what's our value proposition, right? We need to let them know that, hey, and this goes for all real estate, and I'll tie it back into divorce, is that, trust me that I do have a true fiduciary duty, and then is put your interests above any of your interests above my own. And then specifically tying that back into divorce, it's one of those things that if I can establish that rapport early and earn their trust and letting them know that, again, hey, I'm going to communicate with both sides separately but equally. So let me know what you may or may not want to say to the other party, or you want the other party to hear, and just having that confidence to let them know right away that I am going to work for the best interest in that. Because I mean, if you don't, again, you got to think about it. These people have been through the ringer, right?
Yeah.
They've been in going to battle with the other spouse, with their attorney, with the courts. If there's children involved, maybe there's some additional issues, right? So for the last several months or several years, usually the real estate's kind of the last thing that gets kind of worked on and developed into the situation. But you know, who am I? I'm just this new face that they now have to deal with, right? And so just letting them know that, like, again, I don't want you guys to feel uncomfortable around me. I am truly going to work on both of your behalves to get this thing done in the most timely manner, the most efficient manner, and get you guys the most money possible. And if you establish that right up front, it tends to take a lot of the air out of their what's the right word? Their combativeness, I guess, would be the most appropriate term. Because
Yeah.
yeah, they'll do everything they can to kind of self-sabotage, and maybe, hey, if I do this, I'm really sticking it to the other side. And again, I'm going to say, hey guys, like, if you work with me, you don't have to work with each other, but you work with me, communicate with me. I will make sure all of this gets resolved as best as possible. It tends to take a lot of the wind out of their sails in terms of wanting to go to battle, because that's all they've been doing
Yeah.
for the last, like I said, several months or years. So I truly don't have a, care one way or another who wins or loses. I just want what's
Yeah.
best ultimately for the house, at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of people, by the time that they get to the step of selling their house, they're already battle worn. They're already done with their divorce. They just want it to be over. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, you're 100% correct. Yeah, it's, and sometimes you'll see that too. They're like, you know what, I don't care. And when they say they don't care, I mean, nobody doesn't care about the largest financial asset. They may
yeah.
say that, but at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, they want to know, like, okay, what are we going to do? What's the process? What we can do? I'm using she as an example, of course, is she not letting any showings happen? Is he not letting anybody in and keeping the dogs in the yard so nobody can come into the house, or thing? Like, no, like,
Yeah.
we handle all that up front. We establish that precedent up front with both the parties, and if necessary with the attorneys. I think part of my value proposition is to keep the attorneys in as far out of the real estate as possible. Just, one, it helps, keep the billable hours down. These people
Yeah.
are already at their wits end. Usually they're doing okay equity wise, but don't usually have two nickels to rub together. So it's a
Yeah.
matter of, like, okay, like, hey, work with me as much as you may not want to work with the other party. Work with me and I will get it done for you guys on both of your behalves.
Yeah. What are the common pitfalls that people can fall into during the selling process?
So kind of going back to the last little bit is, oftentimes they've, exhausted a lot of their financial situation to attorney fees, court fees, etc. So there might be a lot of deferred maintenance on the property. They probably, again, don't love the others. Well, that's the wrong word to use in a situation like divorce, but they don't have much care for the other party, right? So it's like, well, forget that person. I'm going to do what I can to make sure that make their life as miserable as possible. So the common pitfalls I typically come across are deferred maintenance on the property, behind on payments, even, stuff of that nature. So again, they're stressed and exhausted. And so they may not have the means to get top dollar for their house in the current condition. So I do have a couple programs that I have both with my preferred partners, my vendors, HVAC companies, junk haul companies, and I have another program. It's called the CAP program, Cash Advancement Program, to really help try to alleviate some of those pitfalls because it's a very slippery slope. If it's something minor, all of a sudden the basement floods, right? Something of that nature. So it's like, what can we do to get ahead? And that's usually what happens when I go on that first listing appointment. I I use that term loosely because it's more really me just going into the property and assessing what the current state of the home is, right? I can go to the multiple listing service and see how many bedrooms it has, the square footage, year it was built, et cetera, et cetera. But in these cases, I've often found with divorce, there's often a ton, well, I don't say a ton, varying degrees of deferred maintenance that's important to know about before we go in and truly go about marketing the property.
Yeah, because the last thing you want is somebody who is the spouse who lives in the house to go, well, screw my husband or wife. I'm gonna trash the place and then fall off the
Mhm.
radar.
Right. And and it's human nature, and I get it, depending on how acrimonious the divorce was. I mean, I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, luckily, and hopefully I ever don't. At the same time, I would get why they'd want to kind of stick it to the other side, right? But what they don't realize is that at the end of the day, if the home is going to be ordered to be sold, they're costing themselves ultimately money, by time and money. They're costing themselves ultimately money on how much they're going to get back. So it really works against their self-interest. But
Yeah,
again, there's that human nature element of it as well. Excuse
absolutely.
me.
Um, do you ever have a hard time convincing people how much their house is worth? Is there one spouse who goes, no, the house is worth way more, or no, you're inflating that, or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, it's what usually happens is that, well, what often happens is that one side will try to buy the other side out, right? They'll try to refinance it in their own name, get out from underneath it. And just with where home values are here in the state of Utah, with what interest rates are, you don't see that too often, right? Because you've got
Yeah,
maybe two two incomes that initially qualified for the mortgage. Now we're talking down to one. And so to kind of answer your question in that respect of it oftentimes ends up going to sale, right, or order to be sold. And
yeah,
so the pitfall I wouldn't say is, or the issue of getting one party to agree to the price is probably no more at this point, right? They've kind of exhausted all their options. So they have a pretty good idea. They
yeah,
probably had it appraised. They have a pretty good idea what their home is worth from an objective third party, as opposed to, oh, I saw that online, my home is worth this. I don't run into it any more than I do in my traditional real estate business thus far, right? Everybody thinks their home is worth more than it typically is.
yeah,
That being said, like I run my market analysis, I show what the absorption rate is for homes that are in their area for similar homes to theirs, just showing like here's the empirical data, and if we're overpriced, that's a failure on my part to really judge the market correctly. And if we're priced correctly or maybe even underpriced, guess what? The market's going to let us know because there's still an outrageous number of buyers for the number of listings that we have. So if
yeah,
we're priced right or underpriced, the market will respond and let us know where we're at. Whereas if we're overpriced, again, you will know that from the market as well. If we're not getting showings, we're getting a handful of showings and no offers, that sort of thing. I don't really see too much of a deviation between my traditional business and divorcing business.
okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, by that time they're pretty far down the road.
Yeah,
They've had the home looked at and appraised, and probably had multiple valuations done on it. So they have a pretty good idea what their home's truly worth, right?
Yeah. Do you enjoy working on real estate that is associated with divorce?
I mean, it's dramatic when I say this, and I don't really feel this way. Like, oh yeah, you like being a glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
No, it's really not. Because again, people have it's been decided that hey, it's in the best interest of both parties to just go their separate ways. So they've got to separate the assets, and again, a house, if there's real property involved, being one of them. So I do enjoy it. How I came about doing this is kind of interesting because in 2020, 2019, 2020, so kind of right at the start of COVID, I was just making my care calls to my sphere of influence, to my database. And I just happened to reach out to a couple of people and they're like, oh, thank goodness you called. I'm getting divorced and need to sell my property. Like, oh, okay. And I had never done a divorce listing to this point.
Yeah.
This is, like I said, about 5.5, 6 years ago. I'm like, okay, great. So we went through it, did everything. And that's when I kind of had this, oh, that took an entirely different set of skills than a traditional real estate sale, right? Usually you have people
Yeah.
looking to sell a property because they need to move out of state for work or they need to upsize or downsize or et cetera, et cetera. In this case, it's people, and they were luckily they were pretty okay with each other. It was what it was. They understood that the home just needed to be sold. So it wasn't too adversarial. At the same time, it did take a different set of skills to get it done. And that's when I looked at this like, okay, there's a niche here because the unfortunate reality is people get divorced. And so they need somebody who can go in there and be again a true third neutral third party. I didn't know that term until I started kind of getting into some of these educational groups that I'm in right now and involved with, but I do really like it. And it's not an easy paycheck. You don't call up a divorce attorney and say, hey, do you have any clients that need to sell their home? Oh, you do? Great. And you start listing properties. I mean, even the easier ones I've had have taken close to a year to list. I'm working on one right now that's been going on maybe 2.5 years. So it's not for the faint of heart, but I do enjoy it because there is something to having a resolution to these people's biggest problems and being a part of that I really do
Yeah.
enjoy. And I've noticed at the end of the day, they're usually my most grateful clients. And it just ties back to that. Hey, you know what? You said you were what you said you were. And that was somebody who puts our interests above your own. I may not have agreed with everything or liked everything that you've said, but at the end of the day, you took a lot of that pressure off of our shoulders. And usually they're saying, first person, that off of my shoulders and got this done like you said you were going to do. So there's a lot of gratification in that.
Great. Um,
Excuse me.
if a house is sold because of divorce, does that affect the price or the overall structure of the deal?
Not that I've experienced, and the reason is several, for several reasons, is that one, and I think this is paramount, and a lot of people understand this. I called on a listing for a set of buyers over the weekend. I'm like, oh, well, can you tell me about the property? And she's like, oh, well, they're getting divorced. So my clients didn't end up pursuing that property. It just didn't end up working out for them, excuse me. But I could have used that to maybe, hey, let's go in there and lowball them. Let's do this because I now know something that I shouldn't know.
Yeah.
Familial status is protected class, in America. So when you see that equal opportunity on that, it's like basically saying, hey, no race, gender, sexual orientation.
Yeah.
Familial status is one of those protected classes. So when somebody calls me and says, "Oh, why are they selling?" I'm like, you know what? It's just time for them to sell. So I don't actually let the cat out of the bag because one, it's not anybody's in. It's none of their business to be first off, and
Yeah.
two, I've got a duty to protect that. So I don't really reflect on that. I mean, if they go and tell their friends or whatnot, hey, my house is, I'm getting divorced and I'm selling my property, I can't control that. But in terms of my marketing, I don't let that cat out of the bag because it's nobody's business. My job is just let them know, like, hey, the property's for sale. If you're interested in this home at 123 Main Street, come take a look, and we're priced accordingly based on what I've seen for sale. So let's see what we can put together. But I never let them know it's a divorce situation. That would be a very big no-no. It's against our code of ethics, and that could be something where I could lose my license.
Okay. That's very good to know. How long does it take for a house to be sold? Whether the divorce is pending or after the decree is issued by the court, does that change how long it takes to be sold?
No, so the process of getting the home ready for sale may take some time because various things happen. And that kind of goes back to one of your previous questions and saying, what are maybe some of the pitfalls, or have you ever had somebody kind of work against you intentionally? But once we've kind of resolved all that, and I'm to the point where, okay, great, photos are taken, the lockbox is on, the for sale yard signs ordered to be installed, those sorts of things, I found that it becomes pretty much a traditional sale in terms of days on market. And again, it goes back to the pricing, right? If I can get both parties to agree that the pricing was done correctly and
Yeah.
or agree to the price I recommended, then usually we're in pretty good shape. But I found that at that point, it's pretty much operates as a traditional sale. So if it's a slower market, it's just going to take longer to sell. If it's a hotter market, it's going to move quickly. Again, all other things being equal, right? But for the most
Yeah.
part, once we're in the position of getting it on the market and live on the multiple listing service and broadcast all the websites and social media, I find that the time frame is pretty typical to what the market is bearing at the time as well.
Okay. Well, wonderful. I know a lot of people would want to know that just because they're going through a divorce, it's really dependent on the market, and it's not really gonna change whether or not, how long the house is sold, as long as everybody agrees to it.
Right. And
Yeah.
let's say the home's not in very good shape. We'll
Yeah.
price accordingly for that. So let them know, hey, if you were to do fix, A, B, and C, then I think the price will be this. Right now we're at price X, but I think you can go to price Y. Like, hey, we just don't have in the budget. We can't do that. Okay, then let's agree to list it at price X. Then letting the other, in my marketing, let's say, hey, home is listed in our opinion, it's priced correctly for the condition it's in. And it's not anything different than if I were to go on the multiple listing service right now and see a property that's, property being sold as is, seller's not in a position to make any repairs, those sorts of things. You can control the narrative pretty easily right out the gate if you know what's going on.
Wonderful. What can people do to make selling their house in the process of a divorce better? What can they do to just make it easier on all parties involved?
Yeah, I think this is the one that kind of gets lost in all the in everything, right? Usually the house is one of the last things, or houses or real property or land or whatever they may own commercial properties as well, for that matter, if that's the case, is that it's usually one of the last things talked about. And that's what I try to tell the attorneys who I network with, and saying, if you've got a case that comes before you, let me know if there's real property involved. Not even for me to start looking at what the value is necessary, but just let me know so I can kind of get a lay of the land, because it's human nature. Again, we've talked about it already, that
Yeah.
it's adversarial. I'm not going to do this because it may benefit the other side, when
Yeah.
they don't realize that by not doing certain things that they're actually hurting themselves in the end. So I often know that the things I would recommend is, hey, keeping the home in as best shape as possible for your situation, right? I mean, again, if you don't have very much money to put towards fresh coats of paint or a new roof or plumbing or whatever, just doing the best you can with what you have will go a long way at the end. Again, it may not feel good, you may not like it, because again, you're not sticking it to the other party like you said you were going to do this
Yeah.
whole time. And one thing that I found as well in the last several cases that I've been on is also, if possible, despite what, and I'm not saying attorneys do this, so I'm not throwing any shade towards attorneys or anything like that, but it's
Yeah.
like, if somebody gets in your ear and says, hey, you know what you should really do is stick it to the other side, is don't make the mortgage payment. Well, if you can't make the mortgage payment, or you won't, can't and won't are two different things, right? If you can't, you
Yeah.
can't. Again, there's financial situations that usually result from divorce where people are get, on very thin ice. But if you won't, just out of pride and principle, then I say you gotta check that pride at the door, because now you're costing yourselves late fees. It's going to kill your credit score. If we get to a certain point on, if you're late a certain number of payments, the bank could theoretically foreclose, right? So just instead of having real estate and the real property kind of at the end of the back of the head, back of the mind, excuse me, having a little more forward thinking. And that's what I try to do with my attorneys is like, hey, make sure that they stay on top of their mortgage payments. have them do their best to keep the yard in shape, to keep the interior in shape. If there's any deferred maintenance, try and get that resolved, and that's more stuff that, even though it's real property, I don't get involved in because I don't want them to think that, oh, I'm saying he needs to spend money on this, she needs to spend money on that. It's like, no, for your best interest. If the home is looking like it's going to be ordered to be sold or you agree for it to be sold, do what
Yeah.
you can. So it really makes the sale at the end of the day. Again, the three things that every client wants: the most amount of money, the least amount of trouble, and the least amount of time. So, and that's
Yeah.
traditional real estate, is 101 as it is for divorcing real estate as well.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that was my last question for you. Where can people
Sure.
find your services?
Yeah, well, appreciate that. Yeah, so again, my name is Sean Erickson. I'm with Keller Williams, Salt Lake City. You can give me a call, or shoot me a text. My phone number is 801-694-3264. You can look me up online. You can Google me. I am a certified divorce real estate expert. I've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, really, really digging into this niche because, again, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not where you think like, oh, I'm going to get a ton of referrals from my divorce attorney friends right off the bat. If you get some, great, but just realize there's a lot that goes into it. We do case studies monthly. We look at everything, and I consult with people from around the country because there's always something that comes up that none of us have experienced before. So it really pays off to get the education. So it's something that I value tremendously because these are people that really, really, really need help. And at the end of the day, they typically are really grateful for it. Really, I don't help either party buy a property on the side. So if I'm listing Mr. and Mrs. Smith's house, I'm not going to help Mr. Smith buy a home with it. Or likewise, for the ex-wife, it's just, no, truly, guys, like my vision is very tunnel focused on getting this home sold for you. Yeah, there's no conflicts of interest that arise from working with me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.